CAIR is a civil rights and advocacy organization, meaning it provides free legal services to people who face discrimination because of their religion, their race, their ethnicity, and also does advocacy programs with community. CAIR, C-A-I-R, stands for Council on American Islamic Relations. At the national level, it started in 1994, but a group of Muslims coming together, seeing that Muslims in America, their numbers were increasing, especially immigrant Muslims, and in the immigrant Muslim community, civil rights, discrimination, as they were slowly becoming citizens and all, there were more issues as numbers increased, and they wanted to provide a resource to them. The community was starting to see discrimination against people who were wearing the hijab, or discrimination in the workplace, things like that, and they wanted to make sure that they could mobilize the community and be a resource. I was born and raised in Turkey, a city called Izmir or Smyrna on the Aegean coast of Turkey. And yeah, after that, we lived in different cities and all of that. And then I went to study international relations for my undergraduate education in Ankara, in the capital city, at a university which was established by the United States during the Cold War, right? So that was something that America was doing, establishing these universities in different parts of the Middle East to gain more influence. And I was really passionate, and I continue to be about international relations, diplomacy, and especially about a global Muslim identity. How can we overcome our national biases? And the department that I studied had a very a quote-unquote left-leaning, critical approach that I feel continues to stay with me, and I think I benefited from that. During my undergraduate time, my junior year, was the first time I ever flew and first time I ever left. I came to Washington, D.C. for an internship. This is in 2003. And then after doing my undergraduate, then I started to do a master's degree and was working at a think tank in Ankara. In 2007, I came to Boston University to the political science department as a PhD student. And even though initially I was thinking of doing some other project, eventually I ended up working on American Muslim identity questions. Right, so when I finished in 2016, I moved to Washington, D.C. That summer, I got married to my wife, who was about to start medical school here in Philadelphia. She is of Turkish-American background. Her parents had come here as students, and they stayed on. So we got married, and then for 1 year, I was looking for a teaching job or something in the Philadelphia area, because living in different cities, having 2 apartments, was obviously difficult financially and otherwise. And then one of her family friends was on the board of CAIR Philadelphia, and the person who was doing education and outreach had left the position, and he knew that I was looking for a job, this board member. So he said, look, I mean, it's relevant to your academic work, and I was like, yeah, I will do anything in the Philadelphia area. So alhamdulillah, that's how I moved to this region. We lived in Philadelphia for 1 year, and then moved to Allentown, and that's where we live because my wife's program was through a partnership with a hospital in Allentown. And yeah, she's now doing her residency. We have a 3-year-old who is a pandemic baby, and he has joined way too many Zoom meetings, and many colleagues from our work are familiar with his face. In Pennsylvania, the expansion of CAIR or a CAIR chapter being founded dates to after post 9/11 period, right? When 9/11 happened in 2001, then government surveillance against Muslims increased, civil rights violations increased, and local communities were looking at resources, especially legal resources. So after 9/11, with these issues at stake in Philadelphia, Around 2005, different community leaders came together and said, we need a CAIR chapter in our city, in our region, and that's how CAIR Philadelphia was established. And the reason why it's still relevant today is, in my view, because history doesn't progress always towards the positive, right? So in some ways, if you think, right, so it's been somewhat 3 years since 9/11. We are still seeing government infringement of people's civil rights. We are still seeing discrimination in schools, in the workplace, when people are traveling, just because of their identity, just because of their name, just because of how they look, how they dress. We have community members who have faced discrimination either in a business or in schools. Not all of these complaints lead to legal cases or going to court, right? For example, if a student says that he or she was bullied by his peers, we will work with the school district to make sure that they are ensuring a good learning environment and climate for all students, that bullying is not tolerated, and that there are resources for each side of this, so that every student can walk away from it with knowing their rights and with their rights intact. There are then cases of housing discrimination cases. In some instances, we will work with our community members, but then also would seek additional legal counsel specializing on a case. Housing discrimination is sometimes one of these. In some cases, some criminal sort of processes involve that. And again, in some of these legal cases, there's really blatant discrimination. People have biases. In others, it is structural issues that people who are the immediate people who are doing the injustice are doing it because there's a system around it, right? So I hope this sheds some light into the kinds of cases that we are looking at. So at CAIR Philadelphia, we have active relationship with city officials, state officials, with elected officials, right? So we like to call this critical engagement. We always, emphasize that having good relationships, having an opportunity to speak with the civic, landscape is helpful. But at the same time, there will be moments when we will push politicians, elected officials. There will be moments when we congratulate them, right? So we want our community to normalize this process and to realize that the more they give their voice towards issues of justice, towards establishing what is good in our communities broadly, that's helpful for our communities. And that's why we run, for example, in school districts. We are trying to get Muslim community members more active in their school districts. It doesn't always have to be at the presidential elections or with a senator or with the mayor. There are low level engagement that is critical for our community. And we have a very good relationship with nonprofits, like-minded nonprofits who care about justice, who care about different issues that plague our communities, and we will work across the board. CAIR Philadelphia is an active member, for example, of AAPI Power Caucus, of 16 Asian American nonprofits, from Korean, Vietnamese, Indonesian, to Cambodian, to many backgrounds, working together to make sure that our community's voices are active, our community members can be engaged on the civic level, and that we can build power for our communities. The Muslim American community in Philadelphia area is incredibly rich and diverse, and many other communities are so as well. And we learn from them, they learn from us, and that's really the synergy that we value. When I joined CAIR Philadelphia in 2017, our executive director at the time, Jacob Bender, the first non-Muslim and Jewish executive director of a CAIR chapter, a month before I joined, our civil rights lawyer was hired, and his name is Timothy Welbeck. He is African American Christian. And I was Muslim, and our colleague Sterlina, Muslim. So we used to say, like, it's like a joke, a Muslim, a Christian, and then two Muslims, a Christian and a Jew, walk into a civil rights office at a Quaker sort of center. And we really loved that richness, and that continues to be the case. Jacob is still within our chapter. It's because of his health reasons that he stepped down, but he's still contributing to us. And we feel that that brings a lot of different insights, right? So he can bring the passion of justice from a Jewish perspective, Timothy from a Christian sort of perspective, we from a Muslim perspective, and we are working towards the same goal. And alhamdulillah, that really is gives us a lot of different kind of insights, ability to work with different organizations, and we love that in our office. Our communities, African American, Indonesian, Pakistani, Bengali, across the board, I think, have issues that are reflective of the issues that plague our area, right? So Philadelphia area, I think, if you look, segregation in terms of geography is a major issue, right? Socioeconomic inequalities really plague all communities. Gentrification plagues all of our communities. Gun violence, obviously, these days, right? So that's something that really bleeds our communities. And then there is a misconception about our community, about the Muslim American community. Often, not only that we are only seen as an immigrant community, right? So which misses the experiences of people who are second, third generation, who are born as American Muslims here, right? And it also misses the experiences of our African American Muslim community. And there is misconception that our community is always just engineers, doctors, and all, which is not the case, right? So if you look at national surveys, American Muslim communities, about 30% live under the poverty line. So these issues are reflected in our communities as well. So I think most recently, definitely the problems in the criminal justice or injustice system, how you look at it, the gun violence problem that creates a lot of issues in our communities and also in our neighborhoods too. You realize that it's all the same. When I talk to my colleagues, say from the Vietnamese community in Philadelphia, I'm hearing similar issues. When I talk to Korean colleagues or more in Montgomery County, I'm hearing similar things. In Dalco, our Bengali communities are starting to see similar issues. And I will say that it's not easy, and it is really because a lot of these problems are multifaceted, that it requires multiple approaches all at the same time. In Philadelphia area, if you look at the city hall, different agencies, you will see many Muslims in important places. We have had Muslim. We now have a state senator who is Muslim. We have a city council member who is Muslim, city commissioner who is a Muslim. Some leading labor union leaders who are Muslims. But obviously there could be more, and there could be much more engagement, and that's one of the things that we are trying to do through our civic engagement work, which is, hey, how can we make sure that our own community members think about running for school district? Yes, in Philadelphia it is appointed, so maybe not here, but other places. How could they think about being commissioners or being engaged from different party backgrounds? And we are slowly starting to see that. And the other reality is that everybody realizes that there is a Muslim sort of demographic reality in Philadelphia, but at the same time, that community is internally very diverse, right? So within the African American Muslim community, there are segments of that community who are more engaged in politics. There are segments who are more isolated or insulated themselves. The other thing that we need to realize is that, you know, when we do this process bottom up, when people start to see the value of organizing towards changing our conditions for the better, for what's in their self-interest, they will become more involved in politics. One issue, obviously, that I come across a lot is many community members are not happy with the two-party system in America. Younger generations, find fault in, in the parties, and then they are starting to voice themselves in different ways too. And there are more independent movements in the making, which I find always to be a positive thing. And they're coming together from different backgrounds without being boxed into one or the other. Especially in Philadelphia, we have counted, close to at least 75. What we do to support mosques is, one, we try to make sure that our services that we offer as a nonprofit free of service to our community is known by them. There are sometimes then processes like water registration drives that we try to take to mosques, or there are grants that our mosques can apply to, for example, state of Pennsylvania provides security grants to faith institutions, right? So that they can apply to get a security camera system installed or a security training done for their community, and then we try to aid them in those processes. And the other responsibility that we feel is that sometimes it's important to inform our communities of the important things going on in our region, and that's something else that we are trying to do. The intergenerational conflict is always natural and normal, right? So even if you were living in, say, I'm originally from Turkey, if I was living in Turkey, there is older generation, younger generation, even though they live in the same cultural context, there is tension, right? Here, there is not only that tension, but also some other cultural elements are come into play, from the way people want to dress to other things, and which is natural, right? One thing that I've, however, appreciated is that, younger generation American Muslims obviously are also in touch with their peers from different backgrounds. They sometimes look and they learn from the experience of an Italian American family or an Irish American, background. And, there are also interracial marriages, interreligious marriages. These are all adding layers of color and experience to our communities, and overall I feel this is the making of the American Muslim experience. Islam in America doesn't need to be compared to other things, right? And for our younger generation, really I feel what we need to do is to give them the space to express themselves, their interests, their voices fully in our community spaces, but at the same time make sure that they can develop a critical engagement with America as well, because America is an empire that has both good and a lot of negative forces coming out of it, and it is our responsibility as community members who should be passionate about justice and doing good and serving humanity to take the good in this structure, and then to also be aware of the ills of this empire as well. Before COVID, obviously, we are still I feel living in COVID times. We used to have something called a leadership meeting. The people from different mosques and all would come together and would discuss issues of concern to one another. Those hasn't been happening in a while. But other than that, we I am at a different mosque every Friday, for Juma. We talk to people, we try to understand their issues. Sometimes on specific concerns we would have meetings. Meydan is a digital scholarship platform that's open to all. It's broadly about Islamic studies from different backgrounds. We publish research by individuals, by scholars who write about different aspects, about like arts and Islam, politics, like theology. But we also put together resources for folks, like, books published on Islam every month. So this project, continues. We now have also a podcast channel within it through a grant from the Luce Foundation. But I find that projects like Meydan, these digital open source platforms, help also people realize that so Meydan means like public square, right? So public square, how could it be like so vibrant, so different, and bring different voices together? One thing that we've been very intentional, but at the same time we realize we need to do more at the Meydan is like not only talk about Middle East as Islam, right? So that's something that we want to do away. Middle East studies is not Islamic studies. Like Islam has like Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, West Africa. How could we bring more voices and perspectives from these places? There is still a lot to be done on that because there are built-in biases. So it's something that we are working on. Yeah, so for CAIR Philadelphia, the website is pa.cair.com. And on our website, people will, for example, if they face a discrimination, there is a report discrimination portal. They input their information there, and then our legal team will contact them. We have put resources, for example, frequently asked questions about elections in Pennsylvania in 2022, to know your rights material, right? So what are your rights as a student, as a passenger? There is information about this, and then our emails as well. So it's again pa.cair.com. And yeah, we hope that audience from Philadelphia or other places will engage with the site, and will benefit from it. And my email, phone number is also there, and I'll be always happy to hear from anyone. I think what I want to emphasize is two things. One is, as a nonprofit, right? So we feel the responsibility of being one of the few nonprofits who has 4 or 5 full-time staff, thanks to our community support, and that's a big responsibility for us. And we are trying to be more present, be more active in our service to our community members. And I hope that they will reach out not only when they are in need, but also if they see something that we should do, and feedback that's really valuable to us too, for all the challenges that our communities face in our region. Alhamdulillah, I feel we have a positive path forward, and our community continues to be patient, that perseverance in our community is really unmatched. Whether it is economic challenges or discrimination or other things, our communities come together to do good, to give to the broader community, not only to our community. And alhamdulillah, that way of service, I think, is something that keeps our community not only humble and with humility, but also with a good path forward, and especially among the younger generation. I'm confident, inshallah, that that's the future of our community, and we are particularly trying our best to be of service to that segment of our community that I think is really, really meaningful.